Welcome to Papa's Story Time. Today's story is Sleeping Beauty. Once upon a time there lived a king and queen who had long wished for a child. And when one day a sweet daughter was born to them, the king was so happy that he gave a great christening feast. As godmothers for his little daughter, he asked the 7 good fairies in the kingdom. The one bad-tempered fairy was not invited. After the christening, there was a splendid feast. Before each fairy was placed an emerald plate, like a clover leaf, set with diamond dewdrops. Suddenly, the one uninvited fairy rode into the hall on a dragonfly, muttering threats. Now the fairies, as were their custom, began to give their gifts to the princess. The youngest gave her beauty, the next wit, the third grace, the fourth virtue, the fifth a lovely voice, the sixth a smile to win all hearts. Then the uninvited, bad-tempered fairy cried out, "The king's daughter is in her rosebud youth, shall prick her hand with a spindle and fall down dead." Everybody started to cry out. But then the 7th fairy popped up from behind the cradle and said, "Be comforted, O king and queen. My gift is still to come. I cannot undo entirely what this unkind fairy has done. Your daughter will prick her hand with the spindle, but instead of dying, she will sink into a deep sleep, which will last 100 years. From that sleep, when her dream is over, a king's son shall awaken her." Yet the king hoped to save his dear child from the threatened evil. He had his heralds proclaim that no one in all the country should have a spindle in the house. One day, the princess was 15 years old. She went roaming around the palace, exploring one room after another. At last she came to a little room at the top of the tower. There, an old woman sat busily spinning, as she had never heard the king's proclamation. "Good day, Granny," said the princess. "What are you doing?" "I'm spinning, my pretty lass," said the old woman. "Would you like to try it?" "Oh, yes," the princess cried. But when she caught at the whirling spindle, it pricked her hand. She fell back in a faint. The old woman, greatly alarmed, cried for help. People came running from all sides. The king and queen knew at once the fairy's evil wish had been fulfilled. They had the princess carried to a room deep in the heart of the palace and laid on a bed decked with green and gold covers. The king sadly commanded that she be left to sleep in peace until the hour of her awakening had come to pass. Now the wise fairy, whose quick wit had saved the life of the princess, knew what had happened and came at once to her swan chariot. She touched her with a wand, everything and everybody about the palace, except the king and the queen. She touched the governess and the ladies in waiting, the gentlemen, the officers, the stewards, cooks, guards, and pages. As she touched them, they all fell asleep, not to waken until their mistress would awake and need them to attend her. So she put everybody to sleep. The king and queen kissed their daughter and left the hushed palace. The king issued a new proclamation forbidding anyone to approach its gates. But such laws were not needed, for soon a hedge of thorny shrubs grew around the palace guards. They became so thick and high that neither beast nor man could force a way through. The castle itself was hidden. Only the top of the tower could be seen from a distance. One day that the 100 years ended, the son of the king then reigning was a hunting and spied the tower beyond the forest. He asked what it was. An old peasant told him the legend of the sleeping princess and the king's son who was to waken her. From the way the prince's heart began to beating, he felt certain that the peasant spoke the truth. He knew that he was the king's son who was to awaken the princess. He set out at once. The great trees and thorns opened at their own accord and let him pass. And at last the castle stood before him. He entered the courtyard and saw men and animals in deep slumber. The prince crossed the court and mounted the stairs. On the way to the very heart of the palace, where in a beautiful room of gold he saw the loveliest sight in the world, a sleeping princess. So fair she seemed an angel. He fell on his knees beside her and kissed her lovely cheek. The princess opened her eyes, smiled, and said, "It is you, my prince. I have waited long." They talked for hours and still had not said half of what was in their hearts to say. Meanwhile, everything in the palace waked with the princess, and everyone took up his task just where he had left it. At nightfall, a lady in waiting curtsied to the princess and announced the wedding feast. Then the king's son led his bride to the royal chapel where they were married. The next morning, the bridegroom and bride left the palace and passed through the dark forest into the bright sunshine of the world beyond. And when the princess turned to look at the castle where she had slept so many years, behold, castle and forest had vanished. So the princess rode with her prince to the father's court, where they lived life happy as her dream. And everybody was happy, and everybody lived happily ever after.